This is an audio recording of The Invisible Man by H.G. Wells, narrated by Right Here Audio. Chapter 25, The Hunting of the Invisible Man. For a space, Kemp was too inarticulate to make Adi understand the swift things that had just happened. They stood on the landing, Kemp speaking swiftly, the grotesque swathings of Griffin still on his arm. But presently, Adi began to grasp something of the situation. "He's mad," said Kemp. "Inhumane. He is pure selfishness. He thinks of nothing but his own advantage, his own safety. I have listened to such a story this morning of brutal self-seeking. He has wounded men. He will kill them unless we can prevent him. He will create a panic. Nothing can stop him. He is going out now, furious. He must be caught," said Adi. "That is certain." "But how?" cried Kemp, and suddenly became full of ideas. "You must begin at once. You must set every available man to work. You must prevent his leaving this district. Once he gets away, he may go through the countryside as he wills, killing and maiming. He dreams of a reign of terror, I tell you. You must set a watch on trains and roads and shipping. The garrison must help. You must wire for help. The only thing that may keep him here is the thought of recovering some books of notes he counts of value. I will tell you of that. There is a man in your police station, Marvel." "I know," said Adi. "I know. Those books, yes, but the tramp says he hasn't them. But he thinks the tramp has. And you must prevent him from eating or sleeping day and night in the country must be astir for him. Food must be locked up and secured, all food, so that he will have to break his way to get it. The houses everywhere must be barred against him. Heaven send us cold nights and rain. The whole countryside must begin hunting and keep hunting. I tell you, Adi, he's a danger, a disaster. Unless he is pinned and secured, it is frightful to think of the things that may happen." "What else can we do?" said Adi. "I must go down at once and begin organizing." "But why not come?" "Yes, you come too. Come, and we must hold a sort of council of war. Get Hops to help, and the railway managers. By Jove, it's urgent. Come along. Tell me as we go. What else is there we can do? Put that stuff down." In another moment, Adi was leading the way downstairs. They found the front door open and the policeman standing outside staring at empty air. "He's got away, sir," said one. "We must go to the central station at once," said Adi. "One of you go on down and get a cab to come up and meet us, quickly. And now, Kemp, what else?" "Dogs," said Kemp. "Get dogs. They don't see him, but they wind him. Get dogs." "Good," said Adi. "It's not generally known, but the prison officials over at Halstead know a man with bloodhounds. Dogs. What else?" "Bear in mind," said Kemp. "His food shows. After eating, his food shows until it is assimilated, so that he has to hide after eating. You must keep on beating. Every thicket, every quiet corner, and put all weapons, all implements that might be weapons away. He can't carry such things for long. And what he can snatch up and strike men with must be hidden away." "Good again," said Adi. "We shall have him yet. And on the roads," said Kemp, and hesitated. "Yes," said Adi. "Powdered glass," said Kemp. "It's cruel, I know, but think of what he may do." Adi drew the air in sharply between his teeth. "It's unsportsmanlike. I don't know, but I'll have powdered glass got ready, if he goes too far." "The man's become inhuman, I tell you," said Kemp. "I am as sure he will establish a reign of terror as soon as he got over the emotions of this escape, as I am sure I am talking to you. Our only chance is to be ahead. He has cut himself off from this kind. His blood be upon his own head." Chapter 26. The Wicksteed Murder. The Invisible Man seems to have rushed out of Kemp's house in a state of blind fury. A little child playing near Kemp's gateway was violently caught up and thrown aside, so that its ankle was broken, and thereafter, for some hours, the invisible man passed out of human perceptions. No one knows where he went, nor what he did, but one can imagine him hurrying through the hot June forenoon, up the hill and on to the open download behind Port Burdock, raging and despairing at his intolerable fate, and sheltering at last, heated and weary, amid the thickets of Hinton Dean, to piece together again his shattered schemes against his species. That seems the most probable refuge for him, for there it was he reasserted himself in a grimly tragical manner about 2 p.m. One wonders what his state of mind may have been during that time, and what plans he devised. No doubt he was almost ecstatically exasperated by Kemp's treachery, and though we may be able to understand the motives that led to that deceit, we may still imagine and even sympathize a little with the fury the attempted surprise that must have occasioned. Perhaps something of the stunned astonishment of his Oxford Street experiences may have returned to him, for he had evidently counted on Kemp's cooperation in his brutal dream of a terrorized world. At any rate, he vanished from human ken about midday, and no living witness can tell what he did until about 2:30. It was a fortunate thing, perhaps for humanity, but for him it was a fatal inaction. During that time, a growing multitude of men scattered over the countryside were busy. In the morning he had still been simply a legend, a terror. In the afternoon, by virtue chiefly of Kemp's dryly worded proclamation, he was presented as a tangible antagonist, to be wounded, captured, or overcome, and the countryside began organizing itself with inconceivable rapidity. By 2 o'clock, even he might still have removed himself out of the district by getting aboard a train, but after 2, that became impossible. Every passenger train along the lines on a great parallelogram between Southampton, Manchester, Brighton, and Horsham traveled with locked doors, and the goods traffic was also entirely suspended. And in a great circle of 20 miles round Port Burdock, men armed with guns and bludgeons were presently setting out in groups of 3 and 4 with dogs to beat the roads and fields. Mounted policemen rode along the country lanes, stopping at every cottage and warning the people to lock up their houses and keep indoors unless they were armed, and all the elementary schools had broken up by 3 o'clock, and the children, scared and keeping together in groups, were hurrying home. Kemp's proclamation, signed indeed by a D, was posted over almost the whole district by 4 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon. It gave briefly but clearly all the conditions of the struggle, the necessity of keeping the invisible man from food and sleep, the necessity for incessant watchfulness, and for a prompt attention to any evidence of his movements. And so swift and decided was the action of the authorities, so prompt and universal was the belief in this strange being, that before nightfall an area of several hundred square miles was in a stringent state of siege, and before nightfall, too, a thrill of horror went through the whole watching, nervous countryside. Going from whispering mouth to mouth, swift and certain over the length and breadth of the country, passed the story of the murderer of Mr. Wicksteed. If our supposition that the invisible man's refuge was the Hinton Dean thickets, then we must suppose that in the early afternoon he sallied out again, bent upon some project that involved the use of a weapon. We cannot know what the project was, but the evidence that he had the iron rod in hand before he met Wicksteed is to me at least overwhelming. Of course, we can know nothing of the details of that encounter. It occurred on the edge of a gravel pit, not 200 yards from Lord Burdock's lodge gate. Everything points to a desperate struggle. The trampled ground, the numerous wounds Mr. Wicksteed received, his splintered walking stick, but why the attack was made, save in a murderous frenzy, it is impossible to imagine. Indeed, the theory of madness is almost unavoidable. Mr. Wicksteed was a man of 45 or 46, steward to Lord Burdock, of inoffensive habits and appearance, the very last person in the world to provoke such a terrible antagonist. Against him, it would seem, the invisible man used an iron rod dragged from a broken piece of fence. He stopped this quiet man, going quietly home to his midday meal, attacked him, beat down his feeble defenses, broke his arm, felled him, and smashed his head to a jelly. Of course, he must have dragged this rod out of the fencing before he met his victim. He must have been carrying it ready in his hand. Only 2 details beyond what has already been stated seem to bear on the matter. One is the circumstance that the gravel pit was not in Mr. Wicksteed's direct path home, but nearly a couple of 100 yards out of his way. The other is the assertion of a little girl to the effect that going to her afternoon school, she saw the murdered man trotting in a peculiar manner across a field towards the gravel pit. Her pantomime of his action suggests a man pursuing something on the ground before him and striking it at ever again with his walking stick. She was the last person to see him alive. He passed out of her sight to his death, the struggle being hidden from her only by a clump of beech trees and a slight depression in the ground. Now, this, to the present writer's mind at least, lifts the murder out of the realm of the absolutely wanton. We may imagine that Griffin had taken the rod as a weapon indeed, but without any deliberate intentions of using it in murder. Wicksteed may then have come by and noticed this rod inexplicably moving through the air. Without any thought of the invisible man, for Port Burdock is 10 miles away, he may have pursued it. It is quite conceivable that he may not even have heard of the invisible man. One can then imagine the invisible man making of it, quietly in order to avoid discovering his presence in the neighborhood, and Wicksteed, excited and curious, pursuing this unaccountably locomotive object, finally striking at it. No doubt the invisible man could easily have distanced his middle-aged purser under ordinary circumstances, but the position in which Wicksteed's body was found suggests that he had the ill luck to drive his quarry into a corner between a drift of stinging nettles and the gravel pit. To those who appreciate the extraordinary irascibility of the invisible man, the rest of the encounter will be easy to imagine. But this is pure hypothesis. The only undeniable facts for stories of children are often unreliable, are the discovery of Wicksteed's body, done to death, and of the blood-stained iron rod flung among the nettles. The abandonment of the rod by Griffin suggests that in the emotional excitement of the affair, the purpose for which he took it, if he had a purpose, was abandoned. He was certainly and intensely egotistical and unfeeling man, but the sight of his victim, his first victim, bloody and pitiful at his feet, may have released some long-pent fountain of remorse, which for a time may have flooded whatever scheme of action he had contrived. After the murder of Mr. Wicksteed, he would seem to have struck across the country toward the downland. There is a story of a voice heard about sunset by a couple of men in a field near Fern Bottom. It was wailing and laughing, sobbing and groaning, and ever and again it shouted. It must have been queer hearing it. It drove up across the middle of a clover field and died away towards the hills. That afternoon, the invisible man must have learnt something of the rapid use Kemp had made of his confidence. He must have found houses locked and secured. He may have loitered about railway stations and prowled about inns, and no doubt he read the proclamations and realized something of the nature of the campaign against him. And as the evening advanced, the fields became dotted here and there with groups of 3 or 4 men, and noisy with the yelping of dogs. These men-hunters had particular instructions in the case of an encounter as to the way they should support one another, but he avoided them all. We may understand something of this exasperation, and it could have been none the less because he himself had supplied the information that was being used so remorselessly against him. For that day, at least, he lost heart. For nearly 24 hours. Save when he turned on Wicksteed, he was a hunted man. In the night, he must have eaten and slept, for in the morning he was himself again, active, powerful, angry, and malignant, prepared for his last great struggle against the world. Chapter 27. The Siege of Kemp's House. Kemp read a strange missive, written in pencil on a greasy sheet of paper. "You have been amazingly energetic and clever," this letter ran, "though what you stand to gain by it I cannot imagine. You are against me. For a whole day you have chased me. You have tried to rob me of a night's rest. But I have had food in spite of you. I have slept in spite of you, and the game is only beginning. The game is only beginning. There is nothing for it but to start the terror. This announces the first day of terror. Port Burdock is no longer under the Queen. Tell your colonel of police and the rest of them it is under me, the terror. This is day 1 of year 1 of the new epoch, the epic of the Invisible Man. I am Invisible Man the First. To begin with the rule will be easy. The first day there will be one execution for the sake of example, a man named Kemp. Death starts for him today. He may lock himself away, hide himself away, and get guards about him, put on armor if he likes. Death. The unseen death is coming. Let him take precautions. It will impress my people. Death starts from the pillar box by midday. The letter will fall in as the postman comes along, then off. The game begins. Death starts. Help him not, my people, lest death fall upon you also. Today, Kemp is to die. Kemp read this letter twice. It's no hoax, he said. That's his voice, and he means it. He turned the folded sheet over and saw on the addressed side of the postmark Hindendine, and the prosaic detailed to pay. He got up slowly, leaving his lunch unfinished. The letter had come by the 1 o'clock post, and went into his study. He rang for his housekeeper and told her to go round the house at once, examine all the fastenings of the windows, and close all the shutters. He closed the shutters of the study himself. From a locked drawer in his bedroom, he took a little revolver, examined it carefully, and put it into the pocket of his lounge jacket. He wrote a number of brief notes, one to Colonel Adie, gave them to his servant to take, with explicit instructions as to her way of leaving the house. There is no danger, he said, and added a mental reservation. To you. He remained meditative for a space after doing this, and then returned to his cooling lunch. He ate with gapes of thought. Finally, he struck the table sharply. We will have him, he said, and I am the bait. He will come too far. He went up to the Belvedere, carefully shutting every door after him. It's a game, he said. An odd game, but the chances are all for me, Mr. Griffin, in spite of your invisibility. Griffin, contra mundum with a vengeance. He stood at the window, staring at the hot hillside. He must get food every day, and I don't envy him. Did he really sleep last night? Out in the open somewhere? Secure from collisions? I wish he would get some good, cold, wet weather instead of the heat. He may be watching me now. He went close to the window. Something rapped smartly against the brickwork over the frame and made him start violently back. I'm getting nervous, said Kemp, but it was 5 minutes before he went to the window again. It must have been a sparrow, he said. Presently, he heard the front doorbell ringing and hurried downstairs. He unbolted and unlocked the door, examined the chain, put it up, and opened cautiously without showing himself. A familiar voice hailed him. It was Adie. Your servant's been assaulted, Kemp, he said round the door. What? Exclaimed Kemp. Had that note of yours taken away from her? He's close out here. Let me in. Kemp released the chain, and Adie entered through the narrow opening as possible. He stood in the hall, looking with infinite relief at Kemp refastening the door. Note was snatched out of her hand, scared her horribly. She's down at the station, hysterics. He's close here. What was it about? Kemp swore. What a fool I was, said Kemp. I might have known. It's not an hour's walk from Hindendine already. What's up? Said Adie. Look here, said Kemp, and led the way into his study. He handed Adie the Invisible Man's letter. Adie read it and whistled softly. And you? Said Adie. Proposed a trap? Like a fool, said Kemp, and sent my proposal out by a maidservant to him. Adie followed Kemp's profanity. He'll clear out, said Adie. Not he, said Kemp. A resounding smash of glass came from upstairs. Adie had a silvery glimpse of a little revolver half out of Kemp's pocket. It's a window upstairs, said Kemp, and led the way up. There came a second smash while they were still on the staircase. When they reached the study, they found 2 of the 3 windows smashed, half the room littered with splintered glass, and one big flint lying on the writing table. The two men stopped in the doorway, contemplating the wreckage. Kemp swore again, and as he did so, the third window went with a snap like a pistol, hung, stared for a moment, and collapsed in jagged, shivering triangles into the room. "What's this for?" said Adie. "It's a beginning," said Kemp. "There's no way of climbing up here." "Not for a cat," said Kemp. "No shutters?" "Not here. All the downstairs rooms." "Hello!" Smash, and then went whack of boards hit hard, came from downstairs. "Confound him," said Kemp. "That must be, yes, it's one of the bedrooms. He's going to do all the house, but he's a fool. The shutters are up, and the glass will fall outside. He'll cut his feet." Another window proclaimed its destruction. The two men stood on the landing perplexed. "I have it," said Adie. "Let me have a stick of something, and I'll go down to the station and get the bloodhounds put on. That ought to settle him. They're hard by, not 10 minutes. Another window went way of its fellows. "You haven't a revolver?" asked Adie. Kemp's hand went to his pocket. Then he hesitated. "I haven't one, at least to spare." "I'll bring it back," said Adie. "You'll be safe here." Kemp, ashamed of his momentary lapse from truthfulness, handed him the weapon. "Now for the door," said Adie. As they stood hesitating in the hall, they heard one of the first-floor bedroom's windows crack and clash. Kemp went to the door and began to slip the bolts as silently as possible. His face was a little paler than usual. "You must step straight out," said Kemp. In another moment, Adie was on the doorstep and the bolts were dropping back into the staples. He hesitated for a moment, feeling more comfortable with his back against the door. Then he marched upright and square down the steps. He crossed the lawn and approached the gate. A little breeze seemed to ripple over the grass. Something moved near him. "Stop a bit," said a voice, and Adie stopped dead and his hands tightened over the revolver. "Well?" said Adie, white and grim, and ever nerve tense. "Oblige by me, back to the house," said the voice as tense and grim as Adie's. "Sorry," said Adie a little hoarsely, and moistened his lip with its tongue. The voice was on his left front, he thought. Suppose he were to take his luck with a shot. "What are you going for?" said the voice, and there was a quick movement of the two, and a flash of sunlight from the open lip of Adie's pocket. Adie desisted and thought. "Where I go," he said slowly, "is my own business." The words were still on his lips when an arm came round his neck. His back felt a knee, and he was sprawling backward. He drew clumsily and fired absurdly, and in another moment he was struck in the mouth and the revolver wrested from his grip. He made a vain clutch at a slippery limb, tried to struggle up, and fell back. "Damn," said Adie. The voice laughed. "I'd kill you now if it wasn't the waste of a bullet," it said. He saw the revolver in mid-air, 6 feet off, covering him. "Well," said Adie, sitting up. "Get up," said the voice. Adie stood up. "Attention," said the voice, and then fiercely, "Don't try any games. Remember, I can see your face if you can't see mine. You've got to go back to the house." "He won't let me in," said Adie. "That's a pity," said the invisible man. "I've got no quarrel with you." Adie moistened his lips again. He glanced away from the barrel of the revolver and saw the sea, far off, very blue and dark under the midday sun, the smooth green down, the white cliff of the head, and the multitudinous town, and suddenly he knew that life was very sweet. His eyes came back to this little metal thing hanging between heaven and earth, 6 yards away. "What am I to do?" he said sullenly. "What am I to do?" asked the invisible man. "You will get help. The only thing is for you to go back." "I will try. If he lets me in, will you promise not to rush the door?" "I've got no quarrel with you," said the voice. Kemp had hurried upstairs after letting Adie out, and now, crouching among the broken glass and peering cautiously over the edge of the study window sill, he saw Adie standing paringly with the unseen. "Why doesn't he fire?" whispered Kemp to himself. Then the revolver moved a little, and the glint of the sunlight flashed in Kemp's eyes. He shaded his eyes and tried to see the source of the blinding beam. "Surely," he said, "Adie has given up the revolver." "Promise not to rush the door," Adie was saying. "Don't push a winning game too far. Give a man a chance. You go back to the house. I'll tell you flatly I will not promise anything." Adie's decision seemed suddenly made. He turned towards the house, walking slowly with his hands behind him. Kemp watched him, puzzled. The revolver vanished, flashed again into sight, vanished again, and became evident on a closer scrutiny as a little dark object following Adi. Then things happened very quickly. Adi leapt backwards, swung around, clutched at this little object, missed it, threw up his hands, and fell forward on his face, leaving a little puff of blue in the air. Kemp did not hear the sound of the shot. Adi writhed, raised himself on one arm, fell forward, and lay still. For a space, Kemp remained staring at the quiet carelessness of Adi's attitude. The afternoon was hot and still. Nothing seemed stirring in all the world would have a couple of yellow butterflies chasing after each other through the shrubbery between the house and the road gate. Adi lay on the lawn near the gate. The blinds of all the villas down the hill road were drawn, but in one little green summer house was a white figure, apparently an old man asleep. Kemp scrutinized the surroundings of the house for a glimpse of the revolver, but it had vanished. His eyes came back to Adi. The game was opening well. Then came a ringing and knocking at the front door that grew at last tumultuous, but pursuant to Kemp's instructions, the servants had locked themselves into their rooms. This was followed by a silence. Kemp sat listening and then began peering cautiously out of 3 windows, one after another. He went to the staircase head and stood listening uneasily. He armed himself with his bedroom poker and went to examine the interior fastenings of the ground floor's windows again. Everything was safe and quiet. He returned to the belvedere. Adi lay motionless over the edge of the gravel just as he had fallen. Coming along the road by the villas were the housemaid and 2 policemen. Everything was deadly still. The 3 people seemed very slow in approaching. He wondered what his antagonist was doing. He started. There was a smash from below. He hesitated and went downstairs again. Suddenly the house resounded with heavy blows and the splintering of wood. He heard a smash and the destructive clang of the iron fastenings of the shutters. He turned a key and opened the kitchen door. As he did so, the shutters split and the splintering came flying inward. He stood aghast. The window frame, save for one crossbar, was still intact, but only little teeth of glass remained in the frame. The shutters had been driven with an axe, and now the axe was descending in sweeping blows upon the window frame and the iron bars defending it. Then suddenly it leapt aside and vanished. He saw the revolver lying on the path outside, and then the little weapon sprang into the air. He dodged back. The revolver cracked just too late, and a splinter from the edge of the closing door flashed over his head. He slammed and locked the door, and as soon as he stood outside, he heard Griffin shouting and laughing. Then the blows of the axe, with its splinting and smashing consequences, were resumed. Kemp stood in the passage, trying to think. In a moment, the invisible man would be in the kitchen. This door would not keep him a moment, and then a ringing came at the front door again. It would be the policeman. He ran into the hall, put up the chain, and drew the bolts. He made the girl speak before he dropped the chain, and the 3 people blundered into the house in a heap, and Kemp slammed the door again. "The invisible man," said Kemp. "He has a revolver with 2 shots left. He's killed Adi, shot him anyhow. Didn't you see him on the lawn? He's lying there." "Who?" said one of the policemen. "Adi," said Kemp. "We came in the back way," said the girl. "What's that smashing?" asked one of the policemen. "He's in the kitchen, or will be. He's found an axe." Suddenly, the house was full of the invisible man's resounding blows on the kitchen door. The girl stared towards the kitchen, shuddered, and retreated into the dining room. Kemp tried to explain in broken sentences. They heard the kitchen door give. "This way," said Kemp, starting into activity, and bundled the policeman into the living room doorway. "Poker," said Kemp, and rushed to the fender. He handed the poker he had carried to the policeman and the dining room, one to the other. He suddenly flung himself backwards. "What?" said the policeman, ducked, and cut the axe on his poker. The pistol snapped in penultimate shot and ripped a valuable Sidney Cooper. The second policeman brought his poker down on the little weapon as one might knock down a wasp, and sent it rattling to the floor. At the first clash, the girl screamed, stood screaming for a moment by the fireplace, and then ran to open the shutters, possibly with an idea of escaping by the shattered window. The axe receded into the passage and fell to a position about 2 feet from the ground. They could hear the invisible man breathing. "Stand away, you 2, he said. "I want that man Kemp." "We want you," said the first policeman, making a quick step forward and wiping with his poker at the voice. The invisible man must have started back, and then he blundered into the umbrella stand. Then, as the policeman staggered with the swing of the blow he had aimed, the invisible man countered with the axe. The helmet crumpled like paper, and the blow sent man spinning to the floor at the head of the kitchen stairs. But the second policeman, aiming behind the axe with his poker, hit something soft that snapped. There was a sharp exclamation of pain, and then the axe fell to the ground. The policeman wiped again at vacancy and hit nothing. He put his foot on the axe and struck again. Then he stood, poker clubbed, listening intent for the slightest movement. He heard the dining room window open and a quick rush of feet within. His companion rolled over and sat up, with the blood running down between his eye and ear. "Where is he?" asked the man on the floor. "Don't know. I've hit him. He's standing somewhere in the hall, unless he's slipped past you. Dr. Kemp, sir." Pause. "Dr. Kemp," cried the policeman again. The second policeman began struggling to his feet. He stood up. Suddenly, the faint pad of bare feet on the kitchen stairs could be heard. "Yap!" cried the first policeman, and incontently flung his poker. It smashed a little gas bracket. He made as if the world would pursue the invisible man downstairs. Then he thought better of it and stepped into the dining room. "Dr. Kemp," he began and stopped short. "Dr. Kemp's a hero," he said, as his companion looked over his shoulder. The dining room window was wide open, and neither housemaid nor Kemp was to be seen. The second policeman's opinion of Kemp was terse and vivid.